You don't even have to pay attention to what exactly Donald Trump is saying. You just have to watch Mark Carney's reaction to this. It's just like the panic in his eyes is going like from a 6 or a 7 to a 10 and an 11. He's just like, what is happening right now? Mark Carney introduced President Donald Trump at this year's G7 in Kananaskis, Alberta today. For those looking for Carney to show Canada that he's elbows up, will be very disappointed as Trump ridiculed left-wing ideology, which made Mark Carney so visibly uncomfortable it looked like they hoped that anyone would save him from having to sit there in silence. Let's take a look.
Mr. President, welcome to Canada.
Thank you very much.
It's a great honor. Happy birthday. A few days short.
A little bit.
A few days short, but didn't have a chance to see you on the day. Happy birthday to the U.S. military as well, 250th, and this is the 50th birthday, if you will, of the G7. This marks the 50th birthday of the G7, and the G7 is nothing without U.S. leadership, and your personal leadership of the United States. Many issues, geopolitics, economic, technology, and working hand in hand with the United States, Canada and the United States, and the other G7 partners with your leadership. Very much looking forward to the meeting and grateful to have you.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Okay, so there's an introduction. It's very interesting how Mark Carney approached that. He started off by trying to flatter President Donald Trump. Oh, happy birthday, and happy birthday to the U.S. military, and happy birthday to the G7, and just didn't really know what to say, so he said the same thing repeatedly, like, well, it's the 50th birthday of the G7. It's the 50th birthday of the G7. Where was I planning on going from here? I don't know. So you see the body language between the two of them. Donald Trump knows that he's the top dog in that room, and Mark Carney just feels like kind of a meek leader. He's being polite, but it just feels like he's being very meek and kneeling down in front of Donald Trump. He's not welcoming him as an equal. He's welcoming him as a superior leader. That's the sense that I get from this. So, interesting that's what kind of came out of this, and let's see how Donald Trump literally takes over from here on in.
Appreciate it, and we've developed a very good relationship, and we're going to be talking about trade and many other things. And we have a whole group of people, some traders and some other people. I see my top economy people. But we have a very talented group of people, and you do too, and I know they work together very well. I look forward to that. The G7 used to be the G8. Barack Obama and a person named Trudeau didn't want to have Russia in, and I would say that was a mistake, because I think you wouldn't have a war right now if you had Russia in, and you wouldn't have a war right now if Trump were president 4 years ago.
And this is where the awkwardness starts, folks, because Justin Trudeau and Mark Carney, they were fairly close for Mark Carney to be an advisor of Justin Trudeau, for Mark Carney to be godfather to Chrystia Freeland's kids. Chrystia Freeland and Justin Trudeau were very tight over the last 10 years. And you have not even 30 seconds and Donald Trump is crapping all over Justin Trudeau. And Mark Carney, you can see his body language start where he's like, oh crap, what did I get myself into?
A person named Trudeau didn't want to have Russia in, and I would say that was a mistake, because I think you wouldn't have a war right now if you had Russia in.
And he's just going to have to shut up and take it, because if he didn't, well, that would actually prove that he's elbows up against Donald Trump, right? But elbows up, as long as you don't really have to stand up to him. Is that the mentality that Mark Carney is taking? Notice we still haven't responded to the 50% increase on the aluminum and steel tariffs that Trump put in. But, we will respond with strength and dollar for dollar. Where is it? Where is it? You're not standing up at all. Of course, if you were going to put tariffs on or counter tariffs against aluminum and steel, you'd have to kind of back away from all those exemptions that you gave everybody, right? But I guess we can't do that.
It didn't work out that way, but it used to be the G8, and now it's, I guess, what's that, 8 years ago, it switched over. They threw Russia out, which I claimed was a very big mistake. Even though I wasn't in politics then, I was very loud about it. It was a mistake in that you spend so much time talking about Russia, and he's no longer at the table, so it makes life more complicated. But you wouldn't have had the war. Other than that, I think we're going to accomplish a lot, and I expect to. And I think our primary focus will be trade and trade with Canada, and I'm sure we can work something out.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so much. Thank you.
So interesting that Donald Trump chooses to use the majority of his time in terms of the response to Mark Carney's welcome, denigrating Trudeau, denigrating Obama, which is essentially the left, and saying we wouldn't have this war in Ukraine if Putin were still at the table. And essentially he's basically blaming the war in Ukraine on Justin Trudeau and Barack Obama. Now, there's going to be people that have studied that to heck and back that will be able to provide a lot more insight than me, so I'm not going to comment on that. But I think it's interesting that his first point of business is to continue to ridicule Mark Carney's predecessor continuously. Like someone named Trudeau. Yeah, we all know who that is. I notice he's not saying Governor Trudeau anymore, but he's still ridiculing him. And Mark Carney's sitting there being the advisor to Justin Trudeau for the last, 5 years? 5 years? He started advising him in 2020. Looking pretty awkward right now, as he should.
Mr. President, holding up a deal with Canada?
How close are you to a deal?
What is holding up a deal with Canada from your perspective?
It's not so much holding up. I think we have different concepts. I have a tariff concept, and Mark has a different concept, which is something that some people like. But we're going to see if we can get to the bottom of it today. I'm a tariff person. I've always been a tariff. It's simple, it's easy, it's precise, and it just goes very quickly. And I think Mark has a more complex idea, but also very good. So we're going to look at both, and we're going to see what we're going to come out with something. Hopefully.
Mr. President, do you think a deal is achievable within days, within weeks? Is there that kind of runway?
Yeah, it's achievable. Both parties have to agree. Yeah, sure.
Notice how Mark Carney has to stand there awkwardly while President Trump gets all of the attention. And I think that's really bothering Mark Carney, the fact that nobody is actually choosing to ask him any questions. President Trump shows up naturally. He's the news cycle. He influences the news cycle in the Western world. So, but let's get to what he said. So he said that he likes tariffs, which everybody knows at this point. And he says that Mark Carney has a more complex deal. And he said, but that's also very good. I guess we'll see how good it is. And is this going to be Donald Trump getting a deal done with Mark Carney, or is that going to be Mark Carney getting a deal done with Donald Trump? And the question is that going to be good, bad, or terrible for Canada? That's going to be what we're all going to be watching. And, it's not going to be a matter of getting a deal done in a couple of days, because if Mark Carney's government was doing its job, they should have been in conversations since January. And from what we've heard, they have been in conversations since January. Melanie Jolie, she let that one fly out in the middle of the election, and then Mark Carney let that one fly out in the middle of the election, in the middle of the leadership race when he said, oh, well, you know, the cabinet is briefing me. Before he's even elected leader of the Liberal Party, the cabinet is briefing him on what's going on with the negotiations with Donald Trump. That caused everybody that was actually watching this to be very, very puzzled. But I digress. If a deal gets done, this isn't going to be, you know, Mark Carney sits down with Donald Trump for 2 days and then all of a sudden a deal is smacked out and he emerges the winner. But if that happens, watch how he frames this and see if he gives credit to the people in his cabinet, or gives credit to himself, or gives credit to Donald Trump, and watch how the media spins this. And we're going to really have to understand what any deal is actually going to mean for Canada.
Mr. President, on Israel and Iran, have you heard any signals or seen any messages from intermediaries that Iran wishes to de-escalate the conflict?
Yeah.
What have you heard? What have you heard from the Iranians?
They'd like to talk, but they should have done that before. I had 60 days, and they had 60 days, and on the 61st day, I said, we don't have a deal. They have to make a deal, and it's painful for both parties, but I'd say Iran is not winning this war, and they should talk, and they should talk immediately before it's too late.
And what would you say, in your opinion, what would it take for the U.S. to get involved in this conflict militarily?
I don't want to talk about that.
As you mentioned Putin, do you think that he should have a seat at the G7 today, that it should be the G8?
I'm not saying he should at this point, because too much water's gone over the dam, maybe. But it was a big mistake. Obama didn't want him, and the head of your country, the proud head of your country, didn't want him. This was a big mistake. You wouldn't have that war. You know, you have your enemy at the table. Even, I don't even consider him, he wasn't really an enemy at that time. There was no concept. If I were president, this war would have never happened. But likewise, if he were a member of what was called the G8 at that time, it was always the G8, you wouldn't have a war right now.
Another shot at Justin Trudeau there, another shot at Obama, another shot at the left. Mark Carney standing there. Guys, can someone get me out of here? Because I'm being associated with all this, and I don't like being associated with this. Well, that's what happens. That's what happens when you take over the party for Justin Trudeau and literally change nothing. That's what happens. With regard to all of the other geopolitical issues, you know, we talked a little bit about this on our live stream on Sunday, but it's interesting where, you know, the question is have you heard that Iran wants to de-escalate this conflict? And he said, yeah, I have. What have you heard? Well, that now they want to talk. They didn't want to talk for 60 days, and now they want to talk. It's usually what happens when it comes to things like this. But for the sake of all the men, women, and children that are having to deal with this, let's hope this conflict ends swiftly.
Intelligence support are you providing Israel?
We've always supported Israel. We have for a long period of time, strongly. And Israel's doing very well right now.
Isn't that a polar opposite? Trump on one side saying, we've always supported Israel, and we've always backed Israel. Meanwhile, Mark Carney and the Liberals, they don't seem to want to back Israel. They want to side with Hamas. They want to side with Iran, it seems, based on what they're saying. Where was Mark Carney? Where was Justin Trudeau? Were they out condemning the United States when the United States went into Afghanistan, literally invaded Afghanistan, hunting for one guy? The world seemed to justify that. This world seemed to understand that. But the world doesn't seem to understand that Israel is doing almost the exact same thing. Almost the exact same thing. Where you could argue that what happened to Israel was worse because they had people kidnapped and they had atrocious acts done to these people and women and children. So why is that different? You don't have to like one country or the other. You just have to look at the equivalence of what the U.S. did after 9/11 versus what Israel did after October 7th. So it's a complicated issue, but it's going to be hard to support one or denigrate one while you're supporting the other, because they're very, very similar in situation.
Why not have China as the G8? Why not have China here, the biggest economy in the world after the United States?
Well, it's not a bad idea. I don't mind that. If somebody wants to suggest China coming in, I think we suggest. But you want to have people that you can talk to. You know, they don't talk to. Putin speaks to me. He doesn't speak to anybody else. He doesn't want to talk because he was very insulted when he got thrown out of the G8. As I would be, as you would be, as anybody would be. He was very insulted. And I mean, he was thrown out by Trudeau, who convinced one or two people, along with Obama. He was thrown out, and he's not a happy person about it, I can tell you that.
Again, you just watch Carney as this is unfolding, and Trump takes another shot at Trudeau, and Carney's like, when's this gonna end? When's this gonna end? And he can't do anything. He's stuck there. He's stuck there because Trump has taken over the room. He's taken over this kind of welcome address, and no one cares what Mark Carney has to say. That's the other interesting thing here. Zero questions to Mark Carney. Nobody cares. And what is that dynamic? Well, that shows that who's going to be the dominant versus the submissive person in that room. Nobody is usually interested in what the submissive person has to say. And the submissive person is playing their role. You know, if he actually had something to say, he'd interrupt and be like, excuse me, let me just chime in here. But this is who Mark Carney is. You think this is a strong leader? Somebody who can stand up to people in the G7? Again, he's kind of like Trudeau, where from behind a microphone, when no one is around him, sure, he likes to talk tough. But when he's actually in the room with these people, you saw with Trudeau, with Xi Jinping in China, completely got dressed down in front of the cameras. And this is going to be the second time this has happened with Mark Carney. So this is the guy that said Trudeau was a great prime minister. Well, you have your neighbor to the south, Donald Trump, calling Trudeau basically a complete idiot. Whether you agree with Donald Trump or not, that's beside the point. The point is Mark Carney's letting this happen.
He basically doesn't even speak to the people that throw him out, and I agree with him.
On
immigration, why are you ordering ICE to target Democratic inner cities? What's behind that?
I don't know what you're saying.
You did a post last night where you said you want ICE to really target Democrats.
Yeah, I want them to focus on the cities, because the cities are where you really have what's called sanctuary cities, and that's where the people are. I look at New York, I look at Chicago. I mean, you got a really bad governor in Chicago and a bad mayor, but the governor's probably the worst in the country, Pritzker. But I look at how that city has been overrun by criminals, and you know, New York and LA, look at LA. LA, those people weren't from LA, they weren't from California, most of those people.
I'm sorry, I have to stop here. You don't even have to pay attention to what exactly Donald Trump is saying. You just have to watch Mark Carney's reaction to this. It's just like the panic in his eyes is going like from a 6 or a 7 to a 10 and an 11. He's just like, what is happening right now? What is happening? And this is Trump talking about his government going in and finding illegal aliens in the United States and deporting them, and sanctuary cities and all of this stuff. Meanwhile, you have a guy like Mark Carney who wants to bring all these people in. That's what he's signed up to do. Remember, he has Mark Wiseman on his team advising him. Mark Wiseman, who is actively a part of the Century Initiative, whose aim is to get 100 million people in Canada by the end of 2100. And for those that may be new here, this is not a conspiracy theory, folks. This is out there. You can just Google the Century Initiative and you'll find it. And they have advertisements, and this is what they want to do. And it's a bunch of these venture capitalists, people from McKinsey, former Canadian ambassadors. You have all these people that are trying to do this. Why? To get rich, even more rich than they already are. Has nothing to do with making Canada a better place, which is what their messaging tries to say. Like, well, you know, the quality of life is proportionate to the number of people living in a country. Really? Look at the most populated countries in the world. Are people trying to get into those countries, or are they trying to leave those countries? So you have Mark Carney, who is fully on board with open borders, bringing people in. And he is sitting next to, or standing next to, Donald Trump, who is the antithesis of that, and is condemning all of the US leaders that are actually supporting that. And Mark Carney is just panicked because he has to stand there and shut up and listen to this, which basically, you know, implies that he accepts it. And he doesn't like being associated with that. Not one bit.
Those people, and yeah, that's a focus. Biden allowed 21 million people to come into our country. Of that, vast numbers of those people were murderers, killers, people from gangs, people from jails. They emptied their jails out into the U.S. Most of those people are in the cities, all blue cities, all Democrat-run cities, and they think they're going to use them to vote. It's not going to happen.
You said it would take 2 weeks to decide
If you don't mind, I'm going to exercise my role, if you will, as G7 chair, since we have a few more minutes with the president and his team, and then we actually have to start the meeting to address some of these big issues. So, alors, merci beaucoup vos questions. Et puis,
So, Mark Carney, after hearing Donald Trump literally going after the left, right? Because the Canadian Liberals align very, very, very closely with the Democrats in the United States. So after Trump literally starts going after all of them, remember, blue in the US equals red up here. And blue up here equals red in the US. Backwards, you know, but it is what it is. So when he hears Donald Trump going after the left, going after the Democrats, he's essentially attacking the same ideology that Mark Carney and the Liberals espouse and have been pushing for the last 10 years. So at that point, he leans over and asks permission from Donald Trump. Do you mind if I stop this? And Donald Trump says, you may, Mark. Go ahead. I grant you permission. And then he proceeds to try and grant something. He says, I'm going to exercise my role as the G7 chair. Yes, we know, Mark. We know. We know you're the G7 chair. You can't not bring that up wherever you are. Pretty sure everybody understands you're the G7 chair. You're literally in the country where it's taking place. That's what the G7 chair is. So this was something to behold, folks. Just Mark Carney having to stand there for a good 7 minutes, looking as awkward as can be. And he should be showing Canadians right here what a quote-unquote strong leader he is. Well, swing voters, if you're looking for a strong leader, I think you got to see who was the leader in that room and who was the follower.